Hello, the title of my discussion today is Black Queer Interiorities. And before I get started, I want to, say that I want to start my discussion today with Andrea Mina's 1953 miniature object, which won Best in Show at the Interior Design Education Council Design Awards. Considering architecture describes and supports human occupation, Mina takes architecture a step further to describe his work as disjuncture. The object, which is intentionally material and not necessarily metaphysical, engenders interiority through evoking inhabitation through its interior architecture. From my perspective, Mina's object is intentionally in a state of becoming. Its form is imaginative because the viewer recognizes their values through the object rather than the object defining or reflecting societal values. Mina's object is my starting point to complicating architecture and design's research methods and strategies that are predominantly quantitative. My goal is to start a dialogue that thinking through our current definitions of interiority or interior are and research methods and how we as scholars and practitioners and thinkers, makers will attend to human scale experiences and values of interiority such that we design interiors that are livable for users. Here is another of Mina's pieces. I will demonstrate the expansion of theoretical knowledge in the area of design as a result of people's or even users diversifying internal values and spatial experiences, past, present, and imagined. I'll also discuss the relationship between interiority and Black queer public culture. And so these three objectives I've outlined here include defining interiorities, discussing how interiorities have been reimagined in the literature over time, and identify an appropriate research method to explore Black queer interiorities. So to start with to walk through the literature, first I want to bring in C.J. Hewlett's interior design, the future in interior design, where Hewlett argues that interior design is tasked with representing interiority. And interiority as a design solution indexes the tiers of awareness to which we respond in the and include our aspirations um, um, and on functions and individualism and myths and place and structure. And so I also want to bring in, Professor Kathy J. Gano's piece titled Design as Narrative. In this piece, Gano in 1999 proposes that narrative should be a design method for interior design. The narrative design method focuses on, quote, internal values regarding social and personal awareness. Petra Parolini's piece, brings into focus interior design's most important responsibilities, that being interiority. So they're actually expanding upon or widening the methodological framework for interior design to not necessarily focus on the visual or technological, materialistic, or the object, but rather interiority. And in the piece, it's argued that interiority can be defined as a process within which a person that reflects an individual's is defined as a person within a person that reflects an individual's unique awareness of the world and a psychological relationship to the world that is meaningful in ways specific to individual consciousness. So its processes include the need to inwardly reflect on one's own life experience and to understand this experience in a way that is supported by language, allowing for communication of personal experience with others. And meanings of design spaces, in this literature, it's argued that the concept in interiority has been proposed as a framework through which to expand the definition of interior as a means of engagement that is not necessarily attached to buildings. And then in interior practices of interiorization, this is a dissertation that discusses interior design as as designing of interiors. It said that interior design should focus on what is an interior, and how is an interior, and also when is an interior. And so now I want to move to research methods for interior design. So in the text, research methods for interior design, one of the research methods that I want to highlight here is narrative. And so narrative is one design method that interior designers could mobilize to understand how minoritarian communities in Minneapolis, Minnesota, for example, see their place in the world. And users' understandings and narratives about their neighborhoods generally make clear that interiority transcends the space behind the wall to include a sense of belonging at the neighborhood scale. So now I want to focus on St. Paul's Rondo neighborhood, first in the 1950s, and then also I will, discuss and bring in imagery from current sites. So according to the first chapter on narrative and research methods for interior design, interiority is shaped by what one sees and hears, right? So what they sense across private and public space. And these themes of environmental safety, including air quality, cleanliness, access, and connectivity, are also important themes elements to note. Therefore, interiority is shaped by both material and immaterial domains of space. So taking this further, interiority refers to moments of encounter between users and physical objects. However, it is important to recognize that interiority is conditioned by land use policies that reproduce patterns of urbanization and therefore usher in political, economic, and social oppressions that are deeply rooted in and reproduced by logics of capitalism. And so demonstrated here are some Rondo residents' narratives about their neighborhood, concerning safety, concerning access, concerning cleanliness. And so to get an understanding of how the residents understand belonging in their current neighborhood. And so this is an image of St. Paul, Minnesota's Rondo neighborhood, which is a thriving Black neighborhood at the time. However, it was destroyed in the 1950s to install Interstate 94 due to the urbanization and the development at the time. 433 homes were demolished. 72% of these homes belonged to people of color. And so as we can see here, the residents viewing the band march down the boulevard is an example of an encounter between users and physical barriers and connectivity to holistically create a sense of community. This is a 1950s photo of St. Paul Rondo's neighborhood. And so as we can imagine, feelings of safety and stability are realized through home ownership and business ownership, which also characterized Rondo's 1950s interiority, much like roadway sidewalks and trains also, or trolley cars also characterized Rondo's interiority as well. So this is a recent image of the Rondo neighborhood commemorative plaza, which was installed to recognize the histories and legacies of families that once lived in this neighborhood. The plaza includes physical barriers between the sidewalk and the plaza, lighting, seating, and historical images of residents and businesses, historical images of residents and businesses. And also, these physical objects and systems attempt to provide a sense of place for residents. Now I would like to move to Brooklyn, New York, where my current book project, which is under contract with the Ohio State University Press, is focused on. Following current efforts to expand current definitions of interiorities at the neighborhood level and usher in design research method of narratives to explore user experiences across interiorities, I now discuss shifting, imploding, expanding interiorities that we could use to investigate and analyze and theorize how users experience space under disappearing and marginalizing interiorities like Rondo, with particular attention to the way that Black queer users experience inhabitation. I now will introduce 4 historic examples of shifting interiorities based in Brooklyn, New York. And so I want to make it known that in thinking through these 4 historic images, these processes of urbanization, economic deprivation, and land use policies and ordinances are conditioning the ways in which these interiorities, these spaces often implode, disappear, and are squeezed out of the public landscape. So this is an image of the Starlight Lounge, a LGBTQ friendly bar in Brooklyn, established in 1959. And unfortunately, on July 31st, 2010, the Starlight Lounge was closed due to eviction. This is an image of Paradise Garage, which opened on January 28th, 1978, which was later demolished in 2018 to make way for more businesses and residents, as you can see pictured here. This is the Barclays Center, which my book focuses heavily on to discuss the ways in which this large mixed-use development project squeezed out Black-owned businesses and Black working-class residents, including Black queer residents and Black queer working class people from the general area. And so, in thinking about the Barclays Center, we have to understand the process of corporatization and urbanization, how these patterns actually, how these patterns of urbanization impact, how Black queer people experience interiorities for themselves. How do they create and understand belonging as these processes are going on? And so I argue that, like Black queer people, Black queer sites and interiorities have almost always been under attack and are surveilled by state and quotidian people. And so consider the material effects of urbanization on Black queer community building, preservation, and public representation. An appropriate intervention, considering these material effects for investigating these, with a particular focus on the sensory impacts of spatial marginalization, anti-Blackness, and homophobic violence, as well as economic deprivation on Black queer people, is, a design method I call Black queer spatiality. And so generally, Black queer spatiality is a framework to index what people do and feel across identified interiorities at the city and granular levels. And so the method notes and identifies and analyze sensation, atmosphere, and object nostalgia within places and interiorities. And in chapter 1 of my book project, I argue that place and interiorities are understood through performance labor, including gender performance and Black queer vernacular. including the singular gestures of official marking and spatial imaginaries. And again, I'll say Black queer spatiality is a framework to explore place-making practices across identified places, by indexing, again, sensation, atmosphere, and nostalgia. And so in chapter one, I demonstrate, I demonstrate and think through public places within interiorities and how they can, kind of isolate Black queer people through social, cultural, and political action. But however, through Black queer placemaking, public sites and body scale interiorities, neighborhood scale interiorities could, in fact, heal, reaffirm, support Black queer people's well-being. And so to provide, some examples, I use the Do the Right Thing annual block party from 2019. I also, conduct a focus on 2005, 2006, and recent Black Pride events as examples of Black queer placemaking practices, which consequently produce interiorities of Black queer public culture. And so, again, to just lay out the definitions of the pillars of Black queer spatiality, sensation is an inexplicable awareness or an impression of a place or an interiority. Atmosphere is the pervading tone or mood of a place, situation. Nostalgia is a sentimental longing or wistful affection for the past. And so these are three pillars that are really important to analyzing Black queer interiorities or interiorities of Black queer public culture. And so just to end on a few images and examples of some of the interiorities that I focus on in my book project, I focus on the annual Do the Right Thing block party, which attracts hundreds to Do the Right Thing Way in Bed-Stuy. And I also, generally focus, not generally, but I focus heavily on, in my New York City Pride events as well, to understand how these temporal interiorities, these expanding interiorities or imploding interiorities are placed in specific to, generate a sense of belonging and awareness of Blackness and queerness in a way that I think design should, in fact, understand and generally think about how the literature could catch up to the ways that residents and users of space are co-creating these interiorities, and to what extent they're creating these interiorities and when they're creating these interiorities. Thank you so much.